Jeff, take it away.
All right. Thank you, guys. Welcome to another week of League One fun. This week on the show, we have Jason, Mark, Ira. Chris is unfortunately not able to be with us, but we still have a lot of content to bring you. Not only some signings and some preseason action, but we have some big news, and as always, some great questions coming in from you guys. So let's kick it off. We're gonna go with the news first. We've done signings for the last couple weeks, and as preseason continues, we're still gonna have signings to come in. But let's start off with some news, and I think the biggest news that is now officially official. We reported it a couple weeks ago, but it's official now that ESPN Plus will be streaming the home games and all the games for League One, including the playoffs. So in addition to having the second year of the USL, well, now USL Championship, you can also catch League One. So guys, one, that's great for me because I'm nowhere near teams. So like that's great for me to watch. But how much more interest do you think it's going to bring into the communities of fans? Especially watch parties, things of that nature can come in, and people that may not want to spend some money on the game, or if you're in places like Madison, it still might be cold for the first part of the season, and you can stay at home and for $5 a month be watching games.
I think it's huge, especially with away games and new teams. The fact that we have broadcast for every single match is just great. Like one of the things that before we heard the rumors of ESPN Plus, I was a little bit worried that they would be all like just local broadcast rights being sold and not necessarily national. So I think this could be really good for the league. And I think the fact that you cross-brand all USL products basically between the championship and League One, that's very helpful as well.
And it's exposure too, right? So you have international players who are coming here now are getting exposure. I don't know about whether or not USL will be able to play on YouTube like they did in the championship games for overseas, for whether it's in France or Spain. But now you have international players getting exposure, and also people who are into a scouting network, right? So if you can't go to these games and you're looking up articles and looking up tweets to see notes on these players, you can actually go and tune into these games now. So it's a great scouting network as well to, leagues, whether it's MLS or other leagues all around the world. And it's just that accessibility. It's a part of a stream, which also has USL Championship, MLS games, Serie A, just tons of soccer, tons of other sports. I think this is probably the best place to have this league on a streaming network. I'm extremely excited about it. You can go back, watch the games, replay them. I think this is a win for everybody, whether you are in a city with the team, whether you are away games, whether you want to go view a viewing party at a bar. It is now easy to set up. You don't have to worry about doing any kind of illegal streaming or anything like that. This is the place to be.
For sure. And I think that for international viewers that they can still watch it on YouTube. I don't know if there's a delay, if it's going to be available the next day, or if it's available to stream, live or pre-live. Live, okay.
I'm pretty sure it's live, yeah.
Yeah. So, and that is, as we talked about, I think the first or second episode, the amount of international players that we have coming in. The fact that you can watch some of your favorites or people that you grew up with, things of that nature, live, that's going to be an even bigger impact. Another news there is that Forward Madison and Minnesota United, that they're going to have a friendly in June. Earlier this season, we talked about how Forward and Minnesota United have a partnership. So it looks like the friendly is going to be announced in June. I don't know if it's going to be an open. I would hope that it would be an open friendly. I thought it would make sense. But
I think it's got to be, right. I mean, why else would you do this? I think it's basically to try and get MLS exposure maybe in Madison, given that they have the partnership.
That's true. Yeah, I don't see a reason why there wouldn't be. So until we find out otherwise, we're going to assume it's going to be open. And also found out this week that Lansing has a partnership with Chicago Fire. So we're seeing more of the partnerships, where this could be potential loanees, up or down, depending on how seasons go, depending on player availability, all of that, which, is great exposure for teams, and also, a potential great pathway for players that can get, that MLS exposure, or conversely, if they need some training and rehab, things of that nature, come down and get some playing time without overly taking away from, players that may not have time.
I like the friendlies being in June. I don't know about the Lansing one, but I like this forward one being in June, because now you're a couple months into the league. You kind of see where your team is lacking at certain depth. You see kind of maybe, certain players for forward that have a chance of moving up, or maybe Minnesota players that aren't playing that have a chance of filling in a spot that forward is struggling in. So by that time, I think you'll have a lot of Loon fans be extremely excited to see the potential players that they can see moving up. And you also see Madison fans excited to A, get an MLS team in their city, and B, also see, maybe some players that are on the bench and saying like, hey, we're struggling at depth, or we've had injuries at this position. It would be really nice to see this player come down and play with us.
Presumably they'll do it during the international break for the Gold Cup. So there might be a couple of Minnesota players not there, maybe even a forward player not there as well. But presumably, if they do it during that period of time, there's a lot of other soccer going on, but not necessarily locally, right? So that's I think another thing. Like, it fills a gap, and that people are used to going to matches every week or every other week. This is a good way to do it locally without it doesn't mean a lot, but it could be get people really excited, right, to see an MLS team come. And who knows, I mean, forward could potentially see an MLS team in the Open Cup around that time as well, in an actually competitive match. It's not outside the realm of possibility.
Isn't that great to hear? A League One team might be missing someone potentially out on international duty for the Gold Cup. That's great to hear. I wouldn't expect that from the league in the first year, but yeah, we have international players. Forward has a Panamanian player that might be in the Gold Cup, and they might be missing him during that time. That's just great to hear.
That's true. And now Lansing Steve St. Duke might be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he might be playing for Haiti as well.
So yeah, that is definitely a lot of excitement. Looking forward to getting all that exposure out there. The next piece of news that I have is that the Kickers is going to host a preseason match. It looks like on March 16th. And it's going to be the NWSL Washington Spirit versus James Madison University. Ira.
So this is something they did last year too. I think it just, Washington, the Spirit is just a couple hours up the road, about 90 miles between where the Spirit play and down in Richmond. It also takes place during one of the largest youth tournaments in the country. It's the Jefferson Cup. It's kind of the spring preseason showcase tournament. So you have a lot of development academy clubs, a lot of other high-level clubs that are, sub-development academy, but still very high-level soccer being played around there. So you can get, thousands of kids potentially there in between their matches to watch a game like this, right? So just more professional soccer, regardless of whether or not it's the local team or not. And hopefully, it also can generate interest in the women's game as well, just by having the Spirit there. It was pretty well received last year, so hopefully it could be again this year.
Yeah, that's definitely good to hear. As we talk about, League One looking at getting players, from academies, or potentially being that first step, and going, from going up and hopefully to bigger and better things. Definitely having them, get an early scout on some players to keep an eye on is going to help out, not only for them, but I'm sure there's some other teams around that'll be doing the same. So I don't know. Getting the signings here, Ira, we're gonna kick it back to you here. With the Kickers, they have at least one signing to report this week.
Yeah, so this week, one signing, another callback. So I think this is their fourth player that they're re-signing from last year's roster. So Connor Shanowski, who he's a center back. He's pretty tall. He's really good in the air and he reads the game really well. He's one of those players that I think is could do okay in the championship, and I think will do very well in League One as well. He's not quite MLS quality, but he's solid. He's interesting too because he's another semi close product, whereas he was a DC United homegrown player. So he was signed by DC, was loaned down to Richmond when they were affiliated before this year, right? They had the affiliate agreement between Richmond and DC. So he also spent 2 years with Louisville, so he's actually won a USL Cup. And now he's back with Richmond. This is, I think, his second or third year. I think it's his third year back with Richmond after a couple of years with Louisville. So, a solid veteran. He's not particularly old. He actually was signed as a homegrown when he was 18. So even though he's been around for 8 years, he's still kind of in the prime of his career. So another good solid veteran signing there.
And at one point was the leading goal scorer of all defenders in USL when he was with Louisville. So I would watch Richmond on set pieces this year. They've got a defense that's very experienced. And I think that, when you talk about a league that's got academy kids and 16, 17-year-olds who are working on man marking and, physically might be smaller, this is a team to watch out for when it comes to corner kicks and free kicks and set pieces.
Yeah, something we should do too, I think, when we go along here. So I spent some time in our when we're doing our notes where I have all of the signings as of 6 o'clock today, how many signings are on each side. So the Kickers right now have 11 signings. So obviously they're going to have in the 20s somewhere by the time things are said and done. They have another 14, 15 people in camp. So we'll see how many of those get signed and as time goes on. But they did also play, and we'll get to this, I guess, a little bit later, but they did play their first full-sided friendly against VCU earlier in the week, and it wound up being 0-0. But they did have all of their players out there getting some minutes in a full-sided situation with their not just interleagues, not just inter-team scrimmages.
Yeah, it's interesting to keep a lookout for how many players are signed versus the potential of how many could be signed. Because as you see here, we're just over a month away from the first game, and as the season starts, MLS starts in 10 days. In a couple weeks, the USL Championship starts. So as cuts for all those squads start coming out, we can see what the players that are potentially out there and the last minute signings that teams are holding on for just to see who's out there. Not that they're overly waiting for potential cuts, but it's going to be an interesting trickle down effect.
And I think we might see some bigger names coming towards the beginning of the season, like in March. I know, for instance, Lansing's already agreed to a forward on loan that they're going to announce March 3rd with the team. So I think as we get closer, we're looking at the roster now and we're seeing and trying to form and saying, okay, what's the best 11? And I think right now it's a little premature. And I think once we get into that second week of March, that's when we're going to start announcing some more signings, and it's going to be like, okay, these are the kind of guys we're going to see on the field.
For sure. So next up, I'll cover the Lansing one. Lansing has a majority. They have 16 signed. So you would expect, roughly 8 more, if give or take. That would put them at 24. But their latest signing is Tumi Moshabon.
Moshabone, maybe. I don't know. I'm just gonna throw that out.
We're still learning. But he's a South African midfielder. He played for Olivet Nazarene University, signed right out of college. Played for League Two when it was still the PDL for a couple years. So Lansing's getting their team put together. We're seeing a majority of mid and some attacking players getting signed. We had, I believe it was Chris that had the interview with their VP, and that's an interesting and an enjoyable interview. We'll talk about that later on in the show, but it's just one of those things where having some experience, making sure they can play at this level and seeing what goes on.
And he's a player from Lansing United. He played for them in 2017, and I think this is their sixth player from Lansing United. So Coach Miller is definitely getting the players that he thinks fits his system. He has a system. He has a style. He says, this is how we're going to play. We're going to be aggressive, counter pressing. And you can see that he's bringing those type of players that he's played with that knows that will fit that system. So look for this team to bring in familiar faces and players that are going to fit this aggressive system to where if they lose the ball, they're going to win it right back. That's just the kind of mentality they're going to have. They're going to be pressing. They're going to be all over the place. It'll be interesting to see how long they can keep up that form throughout the season. But I think when you look at a lot of teams that have, older players, older center backs, that could be something that's troubling for them.
Yeah. So we know that we have the rivalries, the one that the USL was a source of force there, and the lighthearted between Ford and Lansing, and it's gone beyond jabs now. They both have signed a player that has a similar name. So, Jason, do you want to go?
Yeah, it looks like it's going to be the war of the Patos, and so I'm excited for this just because like you said, it seems that everything that Lansing does and Fort does seems to be similarities. So you've got Christian Pato Diaz, Mexican outside back. He's 27 years old, played for Atlas, and is going to be a back that can move forward. Someone that's going to be able to overlap and send in some crosses and cause some havoc up top. So now I'm ready for this, right? Because you have Lansing's Pato Bello, who wants to be King Pato. They're going back and forth on social media, so I'm ready for it. We got 3 Street Fighter rounds. I want Pato versus Pato, and may the best fighter win.
They have to, the supporter groups have to have some sort of award to give to the best Pato, right?
Definitely. I need to see that. And it's a Pato in Spanish is duck. So maybe you have like a duck hunt trophy or a tifo or something like that for the winner. I think that'd be cool.
Yeah, for sure. They also have signed a goalkeeper who's also going to be a goalkeeper coach for them as well. Ryan Coulter.
Yep. And let's talk about how he got here, because when you talk about players coming overseas, he's from Ireland. So I don't know how Chattanooga let him slip away from them since they're obviously Irish SC. But when you talk about international players and, the scouting network and getting them here into America, what do you guys think is the most important part to getting a guy to come over here? You don't know? It's his girlfriend. Because what happened was Ryan went to college here, came to Ireland, graduated, went back to Ireland, played pro over there, but kept a long-distance relationship with his girlfriend, would only see each other 8 weeks throughout the year, did that for 2 years. And, between his girlfriend, between the college memories, he missed being here. And so he said, you know what, I'm going to make a life decision and I'm going to come back to America, her being the forefront reason why. And that is the theme that Ford is using, whether it is Vital with him having complicated issues with the girlfriend that he just met and then leaving her place, or Ryan coming across the seas to see his. This is a way you get players here. But no, Ryan came back, played in MPSL side, Emerald Force SC, and then played at East Tennessee. Got a call from his old coach there and actually got him a goalkeeping coaching job at UCF. But Ryan had this thing to where he wanted to play pro, but he also just started getting into his coaching. He really missed playing pro. He kind of had to wait, a 15-month period to get his green card. So then when Ford reached out to him and said, hey, why don't we have the best of both worlds? You can continue coaching and play for us. It was an easy decision for him. So, and I think he joins, like I said, anything Ford does, Lansing does, or vice versa. So I think Lansing's the only other team in the league right now that actually also has a player coach that's a goalkeeper. So yeah, just another
himself, isn't he?
I'm sorry?
He's just gonna be coaching himself.
Yeah. Wael Zenga is in Lansing's player coach. But this is an interesting one too for me because Sylvester, in my opinion, is probably the most locked down, easy number one goalkeeper in the league, right? He's got MLS experience, he's got USL experience. I think he's a great keeper, and that might just be biased when he played in for the Union. So it's interesting to see them bring him in and say they're challenging, Sylvester for the number one spot, which is fine. Maybe it's also for backup to where if Sylvester gets hurt, then you have another experienced, capable keeper. But also, maybe I'm jumping the gun, but I'd watch, and maybe they don't think Sylvester hangs around long. Maybe they think he gets picked up and moves on up somewhere, and or just set up the scenario to where if he does, move up the USL Championship, or somebody is low on depth and they need to pick him up, that they have a backup waiting.
That's true. And if any of the teams don't have a goalkeeper yet or need an extra one, I know of a prime example. Dan Lind played for the Riverhounds last year. He was the backup, but then Kyle Morgan got hurt early on, had a pretty good season. He is still, for some reason, unsigned. So if any of your teams need a goalkeeper, I know a guy.
So last week it was ad reads. Now Jeff is an agent. This is great to see his career blossoming in front of us.
Mark,
yeah.
So Tucson has at least two players this week, right? 2 players? I'm reading that right?
Yeah, so they signed Luke Hosworth from University of Washington, straight out of college. He was a 4-year starter at Washington, which is one of the better Pac-12 schools in soccer, at least. So, he played with, I'm pretty sure Christian Roldan was there when he was there. And so really experienced guy, 57 starts in college. But at this point, I think he's depth for that back line. I think Tucson has their defensive starters at this point already, both who they have signed and who will come down from Phoenix. But that's still good depth for the season, and who knows who goes up to Phoenix at the same point. And then they also signed Carlos Valdez, a goalkeeper from Liga MX. He was a backup. He played with youth teams down in Mexico. So not an established starter, still a pretty young guy. But again, more depth for Tucson.
Tucson's been one of those teams, like they started off slow with signings, and then they've built up, but they seem to be getting a lot of former more than the other teams we've covered. A lot of the academy players right out of college that have the overall ability not only to play but also the awareness. Do you see Tucson as being, I know it's super early, but as being one of the leaders of League One, just for the fact of quality of players?
Yeah, that and just known quality and known quantity. There's so many players. I assumed when League One started that there'd be a lot more of those college type players filling the rosters, and we've had a lot more international players than what I thought would occur. So just based on the fact that we know a lot of these guys, I think there's a quality that we can be assured of for Tucson. But 4 or 5 games into the season, who knows? But I'm looking forward. I still think, we talked a couple of weeks ago, I still think that the strength of the team is that back line and goalkeeping and defense. And so just the continued those first 5-10 games will be important for them.
So do you believe, and if you guys haven't checked it out, Ira had a great piece on BGN Written Network. Go check that out. On the traveling that these teams have to do. And with Tucson having to travel the most, you're mentioning that there's international players, and you're mentioning, that a lot of times international players come here and they're not used to travel, right? They're not used to going so far. They're not used to these long plane rides. They're not used to time zone difference, and you feel that in the jet lag. So is it safe to say that Tucson kind of needs to have the best depth in this league in order to sustain being one of those top 4, top 2 teams?
I think so. And the schedule's at least spread out enough where there's not too many of those 2 games in a week type of deals where they have to travel consistently. But yeah, until that point in the end of the season when they play, I think it's like 7 of the last 8 at home, you're going to need a constant rotation of guys. And especially these guys are used to playing either PDL or college where there's constant rotation. And so some of them might not have that stamina, that 90-minute stamina yet. And so, yeah, it's important to have at least 2-3 guys who can probably play each level. And the added benefit of having guys come down for spot starts will help too.
I think the other thing with the travel is that, Tucson travels almost twice as much as the next most traveled team. Just a plug for the piece that Jason mentioned. Take a look at that, because I have all of the travel for all 10 teams in the league over the course of the season. Liga MX and Brazil, those leagues actually travel pretty far. I mean, at least compared to Europe, right? Compared to, say, England, where like the longest trip is like a 4-hour train ride. In Mexico, you still have to, if you're going from Tijuana to Guadalajara and then to Mexico City, those are all flights. Those aren't something, those are all reasonably long trips. So I think having a guy like, folks from Mexico is a little bit different than getting someone from, say, who's used to playing in the Irish League, where they can just bus around the country for the most part.
Very, very true. So North Texas has at least one signing this week. They're only at 10 players, so they're going to have a lot more signings coming up. But they signed David Rodriguez, who's 16 years old. Is that right?
He's 16. His older brother actually signed with them on January 31st. So brothers are going to play with each other in the midfield there at FC Dallas's farm team. Both of them played for the academy. He's interesting. He's eligible for both the U.S. and Mexico, and so is his brother. He played for the U.S. youth national team. This kid darts around the field when you just watch what he plays. Now, granted, these are things like U19 academy games, but remember, he's 16 playing U19 academy games, and he's really dribbly on the ball. But this kid's 139 pounds. I mean, my dog is almost that size, right? It's going to be interesting to see what happens when he comes up against one of these other center back signings, right? Like, what happens when he comes up against Connor Shanowski against Richmond, and this guy is 6'2" and like 200 pounds, right? It's gonna, that's gonna be a test for these young kids. But that's the point of something like in North Texas, right? Is they want to bring up these academy kids and basically bloody them a little bit. So it'll be really interesting. I really hope the U.S. is able to keep this kid and that he develops well, because I do think, like, if we need another number 10 for the national team, this kid has the potential to do that. I mean, we don't know what it's going to happen the next 2, 3, 4 years, but he's got that kind of upside, I think. And I hope maybe we can cap time this fall in the Nations League. That would be cool. Just get him a 10-minute run out there in a blowout against some small Caribbean country or something.
Yes, United States national team, because when has not signing a dual citizen of Mexico and the U.S. who is talented and young ever gone wrong for us?
Was that a spicy take? Wasn't so spicy.
You know what? Don't complain to me. What you do is go to the U.S. national team site and you complain to the diversity team that they have and the diversity advisor position that they have that's not filled. So I don't know who you're complaining to, but obviously they don't care either. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Well, what's interesting? Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mark. No.
Well, what's interesting is they signed Rodriguez to a 3-year deal, which from all the releases I've seen so far, I haven't seen a team sign a contract like that. So, I mean, he's in it for the long haul, it seems. And it doesn't seem like it's one of those academy contracts where he's still eligible for college. And so he's with the team, and I wouldn't be surprised if he goes up to FC Dallas by the end of that contract.
We've got the Dos Santos brothers of League One, minus the coke and hookers.
Man.
In a related side note to Jason's take there, in the Wall Street Journal.
Oh, I thought you meant about the coke and hookers.
No,
all over the place today.
For the U.S. Soccer, just in general, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal today where admittedly the U.S. Soccer doesn't know how many kids are in their program. Like young kids, they're like, yeah, no, we just never kind of thought about tracking this, so we don't know. We're assuming we're down, but we don't know. We don't know actual numbers. And if that doesn't explain just why it took so long for the whole, at least the men's national team to have found not only a coach but the U.S. Soccer to find a president and everything else, I don't really know how else to explain it to people.
We're the melting pot of the world. We're losing players to dual citizenship to other countries because we're not even contacting them, not even dropping them a visit. And these are talented players who are going to be in the World Cup. We don't have any kind of diversity council or position with our national team. We don't make the World Cup, and our biggest concern right now is raising ticket prices to friendlies and games that don't matter. And this is why I don't have any faith right now. I'm hoping that there's a change going on, and you can hire a new coach. He can come in with a new system, but this is going to have to be a federation, right? And I represent my Soka Warriors, so I'm aware of horrible, corrupt, and just all over the place federations. And I'm not going to say the U.S. is as bad, but it's also not any better because they are not making any progress right now. What have we done in this year that we didn't do 4 years ago to help us get there, right? I'm glad that Bert Tolter's come in and playing his players, but yeah, this is something that needs to be fixed internally before we're going to see any results externally, and raising ticket prices is not how you go about that.
And the thing is, a kid like David Rodriguez, he's on the radar, right? I mean, this kid is playing in the development academy, and now he's a professional in a team that should be on the radar. So folks like him and his brother, the U.S. Soccer knows about them. The question is, now, in fairness, do they fit, the Berhalter system versus the FC Dallas system, which, they do have differences. So if for whatever reason David Rodriguez doesn't quite fit what Berhalter wants in a number 10, well, then maybe he doesn't necessarily get called up. But I still think that, we need to have a deeper pool, right, when we're talking about the national team. And a way to do that is to make sure we get some of these younger kids cap tied early, and that, they stay on the radar, they get called into January camps. And then, if they, when we have a need, we're able to call up, that 26th, 27th person on the roster that we need, even though they might not, always be in the 23 on game day.
Literally give them a phone call. I mean, it's just that simple, right? Show initiative that, hey, we're not trying to get you to make a decision right now, but we want to let you know that we're committed to entertaining the thought of you playing with us. We want to see your growth. We want you to be able to have the resources that you need. We're here. That's it. That could make a world of difference.
Very true. Speaking of things that are on the radar, Orlando City B has players.
I was sitting there doing the show notes, and all of a sudden I get the tweet from Orlando City B's Twitter account, and they say, roster release. So it's not a player. They dropped 25 players, although the press release only said that there were 22 on their roster. So I don't know, what happened. Was it
math isn't their strong suit, but it's
a couple of guys, beds out on the out of the locker room or something? I'm not sure, but yeah. So it's a very young roster. It's a little under 20 years old is the average age. The oldest player on the team is actually a USL veteran who's 23 years old in Kobe Osi. I always pronounce his name wrong, but is it Wusu, right? Who played for the Kickers last year. He was actually a decent winger type player, outside a winger midfielder for the Kickers, and he's 23 and he's the oldest player. Their youngest player is 15 years old. So the other thing that's interesting about this roster is how many players played for the Soccer Institute of Montverde, which is a residency program in Central Florida. So it's kind of like the Orlando City Academy in many ways. But even some of the players who are older also played for the Monteverde Academy. So guys who went to college and now came back and they're 22 years old, there's a few of them that are on there too. And also Matthias Silva, who you guys might remember played at the Quakes a couple years ago, and also last year bounced around USL a little bit, played for Swope Park and Reno. So there's a lot of there's a lot of interesting players there. Obviously, they're players that they hope will move up to the first team over time. I mean, and again, this is another situation like North Texas. Like some of these 15 and 16-year-olds. How are they going to do against 27-year-old center backs who have a lot of experience and are scrappy? So a couple of elbows in the face might might change their opinion about some things. But I'm glad that they have a roster. Glad that they actually put something out, and I hope we'll see more information on a lot of these kids as time goes on.
That's for sure. So that is the last.
Their youngest kid is the same age as my oldest, so I told my son to get working.
So we have one more signing, but it's not a player signing. The Red Wolves added David. Is it Berriuta? Berriuta? I am so sorry if you're listening, David, that I just screwed up your name. But he'll be the goalkeeper and assistant coach. He played in the A-League and in the USL. He went to Rutgers and performed in the 1990 College Cup final, as well as assisting at a number of universities, including Yale.
Yeah. So can we just back up just a little bit? The Red Wolves have signed 18, Greenville have signed 15. Tormenta, interestingly, are the only team I think that have, besides Orlando, that has more than 20. So they have 21 players signed. And interestingly, so the only roster that we haven't gotten some semblance of, exactly where they're going is still Toronto, where they have 14 players on their website roster, but I don't know how real that is because it hasn't changed since December, I don't think. So
I don't think the first Toronto team knows how many players they have after that horrible ass CONCACAF Champions League game last night. So yeah, I think that whole franchise right now is in turmoil.
Yeah,
guys drop down.
Yeah, we have one of our questions about that soon. So.
Oh, great. Oh, who can win in T2 versus T1? I'm ready. Let's get it all ready. The season hasn't even started yet, and I'm ready.
But yeah, that was the last of the signings that we had. So we'll go over some preseason matches. The matches that got played on the 16th. We had Atlanta 2 versus Tormenta. I'm not sure the result of that, but at least they have a game under their belt.
Tormenta thanks Atlanta too for hosting them, but no one posted any results or anything.
So that either means that they're graciously winning, or they're just very polite when they lost. But either way, manners. Number one rule, manners. Also on February 16th, Richmond drew VCU with a 0-0 scoreline. Ira, do you have anything more on that game?
No, I mean afterward they interviewed some of the players on the Kickers social media, and they said it was good to get out there and basically try out the new system. They're still very much in preseason, so keep on adding players, and they've only been in camp now for a little over a week, so it's not exactly surprising that they're people are very rusty, and they're just, I'm sure they're trying out a lot of different things too, but no real serious color.
Yeah, and then today, FC Tucson played against the New York Red Bulls 2. At halftime, it was 1-1, but ended with the Red Bulls winning 5-2. So.
Yeah, I watched the first half of that game, actually. There were a lot of basically academy kids and the bottom half of the Red Bulls roster, because the Red Bulls are playing in the Champions League right now down in the Dominican Republic. The Red Bulls were definitely pressing. Tucson were trying to possess the ball and try and pass around the press, and a few times they got burned for it. I think Tucson, if they're going to try to possess the ball, they just need to just pass a little bit faster. They basically need to just think and move ahead, and play a little bit more chess. They especially against a team that's going to press. So which we know that some of the other teams in League One are going to want to do that. And I think if Tucson want to be a possession team, similar to maybe what Richmond's trying to do, they just they need to just move the ball a little bit faster, and they'll be fine, right? They're also they've also been in camp for a week or 10 days, whereas Red Bulls 2 have been in camp since the beginning of January. So it's significant. They're at different places too. So I don't know if you could take that scoreline to mean that there's anything anything drastic that Tucson really needs to do, except continue to work on both fitness and style.
So for the upcoming weekend matches, Indy 11 is facing Forward Madison. Richmond is facing Bastille. And then the Red Wolves are facing Atlanta 2, and Tormenta is facing the Rowdies. So if you're out and about around those areas, check out those games. We'll be sure to give you score lines and as much information as we have on next week's show. So thank you for everyone that have asked questions. We're enjoying the quality and the quantity of questions that are coming in. So the first one that we're going to get to today is from Rhino's Outsider, and the question is, what indicators should League One fans be looking forward to determine the competitive quality of the league? And then a follow-up to that is, how big of a gulf in quality will there be between the best and worst teams in League One? So basically between the best team and Toronto.
So I think as far as quality goes, you want to try to match it with, in my opinion, you want to try to be as close with USL Championship as possible. Obviously, when you're playing 16, 17-year-old kids, it's not going to all be there all the way. But, these are teams in USL Championship supposedly that are dropping down. And then these are academy kids who are looking to play in MLS, right? So this should be a league to where you're watching a player. There's going to be some that stand out, obviously, and you go, that definitely is a player that can be playing in USL Championship, or that's definitely a player that can be playing in MLS. But I think as a whole, as skill-wise, quality-wise, I would be happy seeing them close to a USL Championship level. As far as the best team compared to the worst and the differences, it's going to be interesting because Orlando's oldest player is 23. And, when you've got Chattanooga that has a front line, of guys who are in their 30s and experienced, they might put a hurting on them. I'm curious to interview some players and kind of ask about that mentality, right? I think for a 16-year-old, he has a lot to prove. So he's going to go out there and be motivated and be all around the ball and run, ferociously. But as a 30-year-old, do you feel kind of bad, manhandling a 15-year-old? Do you feel like, okay, I need to, be less physical? So I think there's going to be games where you might see a 7-0, right? Because you have these kids that are learning, especially on the back line, right? If you're playing, 2, 3, 17-year-olds on your back line, mistakes happen. And I'll talk a little bit about that later, because there is a certain team we didn't talk about that had a preseason game who made a lot of mistakes on the back line, but we'll get into that later.
I think one of the ways that we'll be able to tell is how some of these teams do in the Open Cup. Some of these teams are going to come in, they're going to wind up playing League Two teams, and a few of them will obviously get through. And when they do, how do they stack up against the championship teams that they'll meet in the next round, in the second and third rounds? And, I would not be shocked if one or two of these teams made it through and ended up facing an MLS team when the MLS teams come in June. That is not out of the question at all. In fact, I've been talking to a couple of people in the front office of a few of the clubs, and some of them made it clear that their roster budgets are not significantly different than the roster budgets of some championship teams. So if that's the case and they're able to turn those dollars into quality, you would expect at least some of the teams to be pretty close in quality to a mid-table, maybe bottom-table championship team. I mean, it's hard to know if they'd be at the top, but certainly competitive potentially.
And you compare it to championship where you have the competitive teams and the academy teams, pretty much the S2s, even the T2s and Los Doses at some point. And League One, that's gonna get a lot closer. So I think it's gonna be a lot more competitive of a league compared to the championship. And yeah, it won't be until the Open Cup until you can see how the league compares to the other leagues, NPSL, UPSL, championship.
The second half of this question was, how big is the gulf in quality? I don't think there's any way that we can know that until, we've seen at least a few of the games, because it's going to be really hard to tell. A lot of these teams are new rosters. There's a lot of college signings that, have to be integrated, and, that we know that there's a lot of quality on some of the teams, and then there's a lot of unknowns on a lot of those same teams. So until we see all of them, it's going to be really, really hard to tell.
Yeah, I on the golf part, I don't think that we're going to see every team within 1 or 2 points of each other. But I also don't think that we're going to see where the difference between first and 10th is 10 plus points. Either maybe, at least 10, maybe 10. But I don't think we're going to have teams that are struggling to get points. They're going to get their points, and there are teams that are going to gravitate toward the top or sink to the bottom. But I think that at a fair guess, even though we don't know complete rosters and we haven't seen official games played with their starting 11s yet, but we can sort of pick which teams that are going to gravitate toward the top and which teams are kind of in the bottom. But yeah, I don't think that it's going to be this super wide golfing class, and I think that if it would be if everyone was way close together, I mean, even though there was 10 teams, that everyone would sort of be like, well, how is this true parity? Is it just that everyone's just sort of filling each other out for the first season? And we definitely know there are teams that are going all out or have to go all out and make this year the year that it's win or nothing. And then there are teams where it's we're just trying to get our feet under us and see what our players can do.
That goes to the question we had last week, right, about build or win now. So, there might be some teams that are trying to just build, and other teams that are, really want to win the first season of the league.
And Soccer Chat, that's Soccer Chat with 2 T's, like Chattanooga. Get it? Very catchy podcast name. They asked a similar question and said, they asked, would you rather see 4 dominant teams, or would you rather see, parity across the whole league? And I have a feeling that it's going to be parity. I think between rotating, between kids, between the travel, I think you're going to see 6, 7 teams really be close within, those playoffs positions. So I don't think it's going to be a top 4 and the rest fall apart. And if there are top 4, I don't think it's going to be a too far gap from 5 and 6 and 7. Once you start getting that 8, though, I think those last 2 teams might struggle a little bit.
And that's what you want, right? As a league in your first year, you want games in August, September, October to matter. And so I'm sure that's what the league is hoping for, at least from a fan standpoint and a competition standpoint.
Yeah. The next question that we have here is from Section O resident or Section 0 resident. It's since we're about 5 weeks away from the start of the season, what was the primary on-field issue you see with each team that they still need to address, based on what we know now?
So I talked about it a little earlier. For those who didn't know, I didn't until I did some research and found out Orlando B played Miami FC, I believe this past weekend, and lost 4-0. And Miami FC is a good team, right? They won MPSL championship last year, have MLS quality players, former MLS players on that team. So that's nothing to really, be hard on yourself about. The reason you should be hard on yourself is because 3 of the 4 goals that Orlando conceded were from the back line, and it wasn't the back line not being able to keep up with good play. It was the back line giving away the ball. So 2 of those 3 goals were literally from bad loose passes that a striker just took and scored, and another one was a bad back pass that a striker followed through and went around the keeper. So when we talk about teams that have issues, especially if Orlando's oldest player is 23, that's the team that I'm very scared about when it comes to defenders. Because if you're playing these 18-year-old defenders and they're showing that, they'll get better as the season goes on, but if they're not sure about their passes yet, they don't have that chemistry, I think teams, especially like teams like Chattanooga, can really take advantage of that. And they'll put 3 goals in the first half and put the game out of reach before halftime even starts. So that's, at least from what I see, if we're going to talk about specific teams, I think Orlando fans, that's something that you want to be worried about.
Yeah, I agree with the Orlando, especially because of the age. I think for a majority of the teams, the age matters, and trying to figure out exactly the balance. The team that I'm going to say that I'm worried about, just because none of us know what the roster is Toronto. Because they weren't good last year in championship, now it wasn't what's now championship. So I wouldn't expect them to be a top team, but we also have no idea what we're looking at. We don't know if those 14 alleged players are the same. We don't know. We have no information about that. And I think it would almost look silly to a point to have, Orlando City B and then Toronto 2, in League One, and just stay at the bottom. Granted, if they're wanting to just build players and they go up, that's one thing. But if they want to put on a face of, we're trying to be competitive, it would be a bad look.
See, 2 teams don't have to be bad, though, right? Go back to the inaugural season of Red Bulls 2 in USL, and they won the championship, right? So, and they've been good ever since. And you look at other teams like even Sounders 2, you look at T2, and none of those teams, while they didn't really vie for the championship, they also were not bad teams. They were actually fun teams to watch. So they passed the eye test, and I think that's important for just fans of soccer. Is can these teams pass the eye test? It's hard to answer. It's hard to answer a section of this question, primarily because we don't have enough data points at this point to see what they're doing on the field and understand what they're doing on the field, because most of these games haven't been streamed or anything. So I think it's once we see a couple of games, we'll be able to tell, hey, this team really needs a better midfield, or this team needs a better center back. And I agree with everything that you said, Jeff, but it's just, I think it's still too early to tell, just because we don't have enough information about each of the teams to be able to answer the question fully.
Yeah. That leads us into the next question here from Weston Shelton. That asks, once more preseason games roll in, once we have more scores, how seriously are we going to take the preseason games? It's preseason, but as Weston brings up, the whole Toronto LVL I don't even know if situation is the right word. I don't know what the right word for that is.
Apparently it was the greatest win of all time. But to answer Weston's question, yeah, I think you do take them seriously, and more so because this is a brand new league with brand new players. A lot have never played professionally before. A lot have never played with each other before. So this is not MLS teams and USL championship teams playing preseason and trying out players to see what system, who's going to start, who's going to be backup. And these are not coaches. You have some coaches, yes, who have their system, but this is not a system from teams that have established that system from years on end. This is brand new, right? So these are games to where you need to see the coach, when they're playing these systems, is it working with the players that they have, right? So if you were to have a USL League One team go out and beat an MLS team 3-1, that is impressive to me because this is a new system with new players, and it's showing that, okay, this is something that works against a team that's already had a system in place for years. They're just rotating players to see who is going to start and who isn't. But regardless, that system is clicking right away. And so I mentioned it before, when you look at teams like Lansing United or you look at teams like Lansing, have had players from Lansing United come up and are familiar with the system. When you have Tormenta, who signed half of their squad back and are familiar with that system, those are the preseason games I would look at, because if they're winning and that system is clicking, those are the teams you don't want to face early into the season. I think that's more important for USL League One than it is for MLS or USL Championship, who already have coaches that have been there a couple of years, already have systems that's established. I think these are important to see what's actually working and what needs to be changed before the season starts.
See, and I think it's more though than the results, because at least if watching like FC Tucson play, like they're not winning any of their games. They're getting smoked most of their games, and they're playing MLS teams. So you expect that. So I don't care about the score line until it matters. What I want to see is the team playing well in spurts and moments. You know, they're going to get dragged for most of the game, but are those concepts that they're learning, that they're trying to implement, working? And are they working well? Or is there things they need to work on? Is there things they need to change? And so I just want to see, do the players understand what's expected of them, regardless of the score, especially when playing teams that outmatch them 3 times over?
Yeah, and unfortunately, well, we don't, unless you're near them, we don't get to see the games, so we don't have a whole lot of insight. But as the season progresses with this new ESPN Plus deal, we do get to see all the games, whether live or on a recap, depending on what your situation is. So the next couple questions we have go around ESPN Plus. Cody Rivas asks us, what our feelings on the ESPN Plus partnership is for the league, and do you think that it would attract more talent since it has more exposure?
Yeah, I think especially if it does get international, like I said, it's exposure, right? It's people saying, "Oh, this is a league with international players. This is a league that has affiliations with MLS. Like, this is something that I should look into and talk to my agent about, or try to go to, this open tryout, because this is a league that has open tryouts. This is a league that gives opportunity to local players. So I think it's great exposure, and I do think that you are going to see people coming to those tryouts, or people trying to connect with the teams that they wouldn't have necessarily had they not seen it on television, right? There's a difference between, oh yeah, I play for the 3rd division in Denmark, to where, okay, how can I watch you play? Well, you can't really watch me play, to, oh yeah, I play for a 3rd division of American soccer. Where do you play? Like, oh, turn on ESPN Plus. And it's just like, oh, that sounds like a bigger deal. And it's an easier way, like I said, for people to scout you, and it's an easier way for you to be seen. So yeah, I think that's a huge deal to bring in new talent into the league, especially at the beginning of the league, right? Because it's still new. It's still going to just grow more and more year after year. So people are going to hop onto this and say, yeah, this is a great platform and a pedestal for me to get to.
Well, it's even better because internationally it's on YouTube. And so it's not, you don't have to pay for it, as far as I know. And so, I mean, you'll get even people just randomly clicking through and finding this random 3rd division American game, who knows where. And so even if it's not even for the players, just exposure for the league in general, is always a good thing.
Yeah. And we've talked about, having a community base, and a lot of these teams are, rallying around the community, or having the community rally around them. And from a pure fan perspective, before this, if you had an away game, if they were close, like maybe you could do a carpool, or a supporters group could, take a bus, whatever. But with lots of these away games happening, it's going to be you're not really going to be able to consistently go for away games, so you can see it there. And then also, if you have people that maybe generally are casual soccer fans, or maybe have no real interest in going to a game, but are like, if it's on TV, like weather's bad, whatever, like that's still a way to introduce people. And also, we talked last week about not trying to fit Europe's soccer lineage and how they view soccer here. But at the same point, we can see that, being that it's easier to stream with the ESPN Plus, if you want to have a house party and throw it on your big screen, you can. If you want to support your local pub and go out there and throw a watch party, even if it's for a home game and, maybe a significant part of your group doesn't want to go on, or even if you're like, hey, look, our team's on, just throw it on one of the TVs. That's getting people watching it and hopefully, if not supporting the team, trickling into the audience. So it's all goes full circle about growing the community and having the community give back.
If an international player can come to a league and have their families watch them play, that's a win. Simple as that, right? And it's not even just their family. It can be their whole community. It can be other players that they played with who want to see the quality of the league. It's a win.
Yeah, and someone brought this up earlier. I don't remember who it was, but we were talking about scouting, right? So if you're a team in, say, the EFL Championship, and you say, "Hey, we need a player that's like this," oh, it was, yeah, it was, yeah, of course
it was. Oh, it was. It was.
Yeah, but it's important, right? Because you say, okay, maybe this is a kid that we want to scout. We can send our U.S.-based domestic scout to a couple of matches, because you do have to send a scout to individual matches and live matches in order to get the right flavor for things. But your first stopping point is always going to be the video, right? You're always going to watch the video and say, okay, maybe that person's worth a look. Let's take a look. Jeff, we forgot to do something. We forgot to ask Jason at the top of the show about his jersey. What are you wearing today?
Oh, yeah. So for those who don't follow me on Twitter, Home Sweet Soccer, I went to Guatemala, went to the CONCACAF Champions League game of Houston Dynamo and Guastatoya. And, yeah, this is the commemorative jersey of Dynamo's 1-0 win with DeMarcus Ageless Beasley going wild for Black History Month with a banger from his right foot, his quote-unquote weak foot, but DeMarcus don't have weak feet. All his feet are strong. So it was a fun experience. Food was good. Fans were great. They make this bird noise throughout the whole game, which is really creepy, but also really cool. They had a bunch of fans that I think between 3,000-4,000 that took the bus down from Guastatoya to Guatemala City. Had to go back with that L on a Tuesday night, though, at midnight, which, yeah, you don't want to do that for a 2-hour bus ride. But, hey, it happens when you try to mess with the bees.
So there's one more question that I saw. I saw it earlier today, so unfortunately I don't remember who sent it in. But they were asking us as a group if we were going to do any remote podcasting at the League One show. So I can probably say that as a full group, all 5 of us, it's probably not going to happen due to location and schedules. But for any of you that are going to, your local games, or Jason, who's just going all around League One and causing mayhem and stirring up things, are any of you thinking about or potentially going to do, like a mini something or other that we can put on the podcast, from the whatever games you go to?
Well, I think as we do, we should definitely send out something from the from our Twitter account to let us know. I mean, I'll probably be trying to go to a couple of games throughout the season. Something we need to think about is, hey, can we use some of those, advertising dollars and make sure we get to the cup final, right?
Are you getting paid? I didn't get a paycheck.
I didn't say we're getting paid. I was just saying that they could buy us a beer at the cup final.
Okay. First and foremost, the man's name was Mr. Steal Your Picnic Basket, so let's put some respect on his name, especially with a great name like that. All right,
that is a great name. Yeah. That is a great name.
Great name. So like I was saying, I'll be traveling around. Jeff was saying it too. So when we go to local games, we'll definitely tweet out about it so that we can meet up. We love to meet y'all. I'll be doing player interviews and stuff as well. So feel free to kind of join in and have a discussion. I have a gambling problem. So if you want to make wagers throughout the game, let me know. I love drinking off of your expense. So yeah, but that's definitely something we might not be able to all get together, but we'll be traveling. So definitely we'll tweet out where we're at, and yeah, we would love for y'all to come and argue with us.
For sure. And also, for those of you who listen or watch the stream, if you're going to games, let us know. Like, send us pictures, send us something from there. Being that I'm nowhere close, the closest game I get is preseason game with Lansing and the Riverhounds. I'm curious to see what the stadiums look like, what the atmosphere is like for various games, rivalry games or not. But let us know that you're out there, and I'm sure the teams will support the local coverage too. Guys, is there anything else that we may have missed that you want to bring up?
The one thing I saw that somebody had mentioned was that there's going to be a collaboration. I think it was with Chattanooga, and they're going to be working with somebody to, have some players play and build some fields. Did anybody? I think it's with East Ridge Football Club.
Yeah, so there was a press release that they sent out about their this new partnership. So they partnered with a couple of different clubs in both northern Georgia and in southeastern Tennessee. And this was the latest one that they signed. So it's a youth, mostly recreation club, but one of the goals is to kind of scout. They have this club has 2,500 players. They're hoping to scout those and see who can maybe move up to the academy and kind of be part of the pipeline. So building a network. A lot of other clubs, that's where FC Dallas did a great job. That's where I think the Galaxy Academy, the Red Bulls Academy, those academies, and in particular, do a great job just integrating with the community and with a lot of the local clubs. So I think Chattanooga seems to be doing that, and I think a lot of these other teams are going to be doing it too. Look at Forward Madison. Lansing, I think, did the same thing not so long ago, where they announced that they were partnering with a couple of the local youth soccer clubs. So that's something that we talk about every show. Like, this is the great thing about grassroots soccer and having all the teams in some of the smaller markets, is that we'll be able to find talent in those markets that maybe was really untapped. And so I think Chattanooga is kind of doing the right thing there.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll see something to that effect as the league moves on with other various teams. All right, guys. If there's nothing else before we get out of here, I want to thank our sponsor, Roughneck Scarves. Make sure you're getting your custom scarves at roughneckscarves.com. If you haven't checked out the latest episode where we did the interviews, Jason and Chris have two very, very well done interviews. Make sure you check that out. And also, for those that are asking, we are now on Apple Podcasts, so we're now running the gamut. But that is all that I have for today, guys. If anyone else has anything, great. Make sure that if not, before we leave, make sure that anyone who's listening, make sure that you catch us on your favorite podcast entity as well. Like, subscribe, share. For those of you who watch, also like, subscribe, and share. Get that listening too. If nothing else, we will see you guys next Wednesday at 9, and podcast should be up in the next couple days.